Picture a ninja. You've seen 1,000 of them in films, in cartoons, on the side of an energy drink, always the same black suit, the same silent rooftop, the same throwing star, but you have never really seen one. Almost none of it is real. The real ones look nothing like the picture burned into your head. That picture is a lie, and you won't believe how the lie got into your head. Let's start with how big that picture really is. The ninja in your head isn't a local thing tucked away in one corner of the world. It's one of the most shared images on the planet. A kid in Brazil, a grandmother in Norway, a teenager in Korea who has never read a word of Japanese history. All of them can draw you the same figure, black from head to toe, masked, silent, a throwing star in one hand. We're talking billions of people across every country and every language, all carrying the exact same costume around in their heads, and nearly every one of them is sure it's real. You picture a ninja the way you picture a knight in armor or a Roman in his helmet, a real thing that real people actually wore. But the knight wore the armor. The Roman wore the helmet. Nobody, not once, anywhere, ever did the job of a ninja dressed like the ninja you're picturing. So where did it come from? If no real shinobi ever pulled on that black suit, then somebody still drew it and somehow slipped it into the head of almost everyone alive. The question nobody stops to ask is the smallest one. Who showed you your first ninja? First, the part that matters most, because it's the part people get backwards. Ninjas were real. That was never the lie. There were men who did this for a living out of two rough mountainous provinces south of Kyoto called Iga and Kōga, and the records say women too. But the job was not leaping between rooftops with a sword in your teeth. The job was information. They were spies, scouts, messengers, people who got into a place they had no business being, learned the one thing their lord needed to know, and slipped back out before anyone realized they'd been there. And what they brought back was rarely dramatic. The count of soldiers in a fort, the route a wagon train was taking, a rumor overheard in a kitchen that the lord of a neighboring province was quietly dying. Useful, ordinary information, the kind that decides battles weeks before anyone draws a sword, and the kind nobody writes songs about. The whole craft stood on one idea, and it's the exact opposite of the costume in your head. Don't be seen. And if you are seen, don't be worth remembering. And these weren't faceless rumors. The records do preserve real names, and the most famous belong to a man called Hattori Hanzo. He served the warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu in the 1500s, and what his own contemporaries remembered him for wasn't a single dramatic infiltration. It was getting his lord out of a disaster alive. When Ieyasu's main ally was assassinated and Ieyasu found himself trapped on the wrong side of hostile country, Hanzo led him on a quiet days-long crossing through the mountains of Iga, using local shinobi who knew every footpath and every village headman who could be trusted. Nobody important died. Nobody was meant to know they'd been there. Tokyo still has a gate at the old palace named after him, Hanzo-mon, and you can stand in front of it today. And the records suggest the women did real work too. There are accounts of female agents trained to move through places men couldn't easily go, entering households as servants, walking the roads as nuns, sitting in inns as travelers who heard everything and said almost nothing. The principle was the same as everything else about this job. The person nobody pays attention to hears the most. We know all of this because they wrote it down. Real shinobi handbooks survived, thick manuals with names like the Bansen Shukai and the Shoninki put together in the 1600s by men who had actually done the work. And if you opened one expecting secret weapons and killing blows, you'd be let down fast. Most of it is psychology. How to read a person, how to wait, how to do nothing, sometimes for weeks, until the one moment you'd been waiting for finally turned up. How to talk your way past a guard who's looking right at you. The advice gets almost dull when you read it, and that's the tell. The fastest way into a guarded house, one manual reckons, is to wait for a celebration. People drink, people get careless, a stranger raises no alarm, so you walk in while everyone's laughing. The fastest way into a secret was to make friends with the one servant who likes to talk. Page after page of that, and barely a word on the throwing stars you'd have put on the cover. The disguises even had a name, the 7 Ways of Going. A shinobi trained to pass as any of 7 ordinary travelers nobody would think twice about. A wandering monk, a merchant, a traveling entertainer, just another tired face on the road. These weren't costumes meant to look dramatic, they were costumes meant to look boring. because a man in a black bodysuit flat against a wall is the single most alarming thing a guard could lay eyes on, and a monk strolling down the road at noon is nothing at all. You wouldn't look twice. That was the entire point. They hid inside the one thing your eyes skate straight over, which is an ordinary person doing an ordinary thing. That instinct is older than ninjutsu, and it's still in you. Try to remember the face of the waiter who served you twice this week, or the person who sat across from you on the bus this morning. You can't. They weren't doing anything wrong, they were being ordinary, and ordinary doesn't print to memory. Now imagine training your whole life to be the one face nobody ever held onto. That was the skill the manuals were teaching. There was even a real mask of a kind. One of those monk disguises wore a deep woven basket over the whole head, a normal, legal, everyday sight on the roads back then. A face covered chin to crown in plain daylight, and not one person found it strange. That's what real concealment looked like. Not a hood on a rooftop, a basket nobody questioned. And on the rare nights the work really did happen in the dark, they still didn't wear black. Pure black is a mistake at night. Under any moon, against any sky, a black shape hardens into a silhouette, the most visible thing out there. So when they wore dark clothes at all, what the records point to is dark blue, a deep navy that actually sinks into shadow instead of cutting a shape out of it. So the one color every person on Earth is certain a ninja wore is close to the one color a real one would have known to stay away from. So if the real ones dressed as monks and merchants and reached for navy on the rare dark night, where on earth did the all-black assassin come from? A stage, Japanese kabuki theater to be exact. On a kabuki stage, there's a problem every play has to solve. Sometimes you need someone out there to move the scenery, hand an actor a prop, help with a quick change, in full view of the crowd in the middle of the scene. Their fix was the kuroko, a stagehand dressed head to toe in black who the whole audience simply agreed not to see. Everyone could obviously see him, they just chose not to because on that stage black meant this person isn't really here. And at some point a playwright put two and two together. If black already meant invisible to every single person in that theater, then to show a character creeping in unseen, a spy, an assassin, you just dressed him as a kuroko. The crowd understood it instantly. This man is hidden. You're not meant to be able to see him. It was stage shorthand, no different from a spotlight, meaning look here. Except this piece of shorthand walked out of the theater and straight into the whole world's imagination, and it never left. The black ninja was never a disguise. It was a way of drawing invisibility on a stage. A costume that means pretend you can't see me, which is the one thing a real shinobi could never once afford to count on. The throwing stars and the smoke bombs came later, polished up the same way. First by cheap thrilling stories, then by film. By the time they were done, a spy who lived and died by being forgettable had been rebuilt into the flashiest figure in the room. Everything that made the real job work, the dullness, the patience, the ordinary face in the crowd, got cut because none of it plays on a screen. What was left was the costume. And the costume is the part you kept. And it's newer than you'd think. Go back a few generations and that all-black figure barely existed outside Japan. It's mostly the last 100 years, comics, then films, then everything everywhere, that press the same costume onto every screen until it's set hard. Your great-great-grandparents couldn't have drawn the ninja you just pictured, but you can do it without trying. Once you line all of that up, the spies trained to be forgettable, the manuals full of patience instead of weapons, the navy instead of black, a costume lifted whole from a stage, the thing flips over. The lie was never that ninjas existed. They absolutely did. The lie is the picture. And the strangest part of the picture is how completely you bought it. So the next time you see one, and you will on a poster in a game stitched onto a kid's Halloween costume, stop on the black suit for a second. That suit is the one part of the whole story that's pure invention. Everything real about these men, the patience, the disguises, the years spent being no one, got thrown away, and the single thing that survived into your head is the one thing they never wore. It's the most recognizable costume on the planet, worn by a profession whose entire skill was making sure you'd never recognize them. They'd have hated it, which might make it the only monument they were ever going to get, famous at last for the one thing that was never real.